I can't take it anymore. 7 times. 7 times I've replaced my tires in 3 months. I've installed cameras, filed police reports, even begged the HOA to do something, but nothing changes. I see you watching me from your window every morning. Taryn, I know it's you slashing my tires while I sleep. You think because I'm an ex-cop I'll just keep following the rules? Well, tonight everything changes. You picked the wrong black man to harass. You're going to regret ever touching my property. Tonight, you'll learn what happens when you push someone too far. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories of sweet revenge against entitled neighbors, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. 3 months ago, I moved into Oakwood Heights, a quiet suburban neighborhood with manicured lawns and picket fences. After 15 years on the Chicago police force, I was ready for peace and quiet. My name is Marcus Johnson, 42 years old, retired detective with commendations and a pension that allowed me to buy a modest but comfortable house in what I thought would be paradise. The first week was everything I'd dreamed of. Mornings on the porch with coffee, afternoons tending to my small garden, evenings watching the sunset paint the sky in colors I'd forgotten existed after years of working the night shift. I was finally sleeping through the night, the constant tension in my shoulders melting away day by day. Then I met Diane Winters, my next-door neighbor. Everyone in the neighborhood called her Karen behind her back, but I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. She was in her late 50s, her blonde hair always perfectly styled, designer sunglasses perched on her nose regardless of the weather. She was the HOA president, neighborhood watch captain, and self-appointed guardian of Oakwood Heights standards. Our first interaction seemed pleasant enough. She brought over a basket of muffins, welcomed me to the neighborhood, and mentioned how nice it was to see diversity in Oakwood Heights. Something in her tone made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. I dealt with subtle racism my entire career. I wasn't going to let it bother me in retirement. The troubles began when I parked my restored 1967 Mustang in my driveway. It was my pride and joy, a project I've been working on for years, something to keep my hands busy during dark nights when the job got to be too much. The car was immaculate, freshly painted deep midnight blue with pristine chrome accents. The morning after I brought it home, Diane was at my door with a binder of HOA regulations. "Good morning, Marcus," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I noticed your vehicle in the driveway last night." "My Mustang? Beautiful, isn't she?" "Well, I'm afraid there might be an issue. You see, the HOA has strict guidelines about vehicles parked in driveways. Only current models less than 5 years old are permitted to be visible from the street." She flipped through her binder, manicured finger pointing to the relevant rule. I took a deep breath. "Diane, with all due respect, that car is worth more than most new vehicles on the market. It's professionally restored, not some junker. Rules are rules, Marcus. I don't make them. I just enforce them. Perhaps you didn't read the covenant when you purchased your home." Her tone suggested I wasn't capable of understanding such complex documents. I read it thoroughly. There's an exception for collector vehicles in showroom condition. My Mustang qualifies. I've been a detective. I knew how to read fine print. Her smile faltered slightly. "Well, I'll have to bring this up at the next board meeting. In the meantime, perhaps you could park it in your garage. My garage is currently set up as my workshop. The car stays in the driveway, as is my right according to your own regulations." She left with a tight "we'll see about that," and I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I woke up to find all 4 tires of my Mustang slashed. Clean cuts, professional work. I filed a police report, but with no witnesses and no security cameras on my property yet, there was little they could do. I knew it was Diane, but I couldn't prove it. I replaced the tires, premium Michelins that cost a small fortune, and installed security cameras around my property that same day. I positioned them carefully to cover my driveway, front yard, and the street in front of my house. The next morning, all 4 tires were slashed again, but this time my cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the night. All of them, simultaneously. The footage showed nothing but static from 2:13 a.m. until 4:47 a.m. the likely window when the vandalism occurred. This wasn't amateur work. Someone knew how to disable wireless security systems. Someone who perhaps had connections to people who knew how such things worked. I remember Diane mentioning her son worked in tech security during our first conversation. I filed another police report, but again, without evidence, their hands were tied. The responding officer, a young rookie named Peterson, looked uncomfortable as he took my statement. "Mr. Johnson, we take these reports seriously." But he trailed off, not meeting my eyes. "But what, Officer Peterson?" He lowered his voice. "Ms. Winters has a lot of friends in the department. Her brother-in-law is Captain Reynolds." I understood immediately. This was how it would be. Even after leaving the force, politics and connections still mattered more than justice. I thanked Officer Peterson for his honesty and sent him on his way. That night, I upgraded my security system. This time, I installed hardwired cameras with backup power supplies, hidden in locations that would be difficult to detect and even harder to disable. I also set up a separate system inside my house, pointed out the windows toward my driveway. If someone wanted to disable my security, they'd have to take out both systems simultaneously. The next morning, my tires were intact. For 3 days, nothing happened. I began to relax, thinking perhaps Diane had gotten the message that I wasn't an easy target. On the 4th morning, all 4 tires were slashed again. This time, my outdoor system had been disabled, but my indoor cameras caught a glimpse of a figure in dark clothing, face obscured by a hoodie and mask, methodically cutting each tire with what looked like a professional-grade utility knife. The figure was too covered to identify positively, but the build and movement patterns were consistent with Diane's height and weight. I took the footage to the police station, but Captain Reynolds personally informed me that the evidence was inconclusive at best, and suggested that perhaps I was making enemies in my new neighborhood. "This is a peaceful community, Johnson," Reynolds said, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe you're bringing big city problems to our small suburb. You know?" The implication was clear. I was the problem, not the person vandalizing my property. I replaced the tires again and changed tactics. Instead of relying on the police, I would handle this myself, legally but effectively. I purchased trail cameras, the kind hunters use, with infrared night vision and motion activation. I hid them in trees, beneath my porch, and in my garden's decorative rocks. These didn't connect to Wi-Fi and couldn't be hacked remotely. They stored footage on SD cards that I would collect each morning. Meanwhile, I began a charm offensive in the neighborhood. I hosted a barbecue, inviting everyone on the block, including Diane, who declined with a transparent excuse. I joined the neighborhood watch, volunteered to maintain the community garden, and became a familiar, friendly presence to everyone. My neighbors loved me, everyone except Diane, who watched my growing popularity with thinly veiled contempt. At the monthly HOA meeting, when I suggested organizing a neighborhood block party, the idea was met with enthusiastic approval from everyone but her. "I just don't think it's in the budget," she said curtly. "No need for HOA funds," I replied smoothly. "I'm happy to organize it as a potluck. Everyone brings something, and we all enjoy a day together as a community." The vote was unanimous in favor, with Diane's being the sole abstention. As I walked to my car after the meeting, Reynolds' patrol vehicle slowed beside me. "Making waves, Johnson?" he asked through his open window. "Just being neighborly, Captain. Some people might see it differently, like you're trying to take over." I smiled pleasantly. "Not at all. Just trying to build community spirit." He drove away with a warning look, and I knew the pressure on Diane was mounting. I'd inadvertently positioned myself as a threat to her social standing, and now she'd be even more determined to drive me out. That night, my trail cameras caught everything. The figure approached my car at 2:37 a.m., utility knife in hand. This time, I could see Diane's face clearly in the infrared footage as she knelt beside my front tire and began to cut. But I still didn't take the footage to the police. I knew Reynolds would find some reason to dismiss it. Instead, I replaced my tires again and waited. I was building a case, documenting a pattern, and I was formulating a plan. 2 nights later, she struck again. Now I had multiple clear videos of Diane Winters vandalizing my property. But instead of going to the local police, I contacted an old partner from Chicago who now worked for the state police. I explained the situation, sent him the footage, and asked for advice. This is clear-cut vandalism and harassment, possibly with hate crime enhancements given the circumstances, he said after reviewing everything. But you're right about the local connection causing problems. Let me make some calls. 3 days later, a state police investigator arrived at my door. I provided all my evidence, gave a detailed statement, and explained the local department's reluctance to act. The investigator assured me they would handle the case independently. But these things take time. In the meantime, I was still dealing with slashed tires, now for the 6th time. I was spending thousands on new tires, and the psychological toll was mounting. Every morning, I woke up dreading what I might find in my driveway. The peaceful retirement I'd worked so hard for was being systematically destroyed by one spiteful woman, and the system I'd served faithfully for 15 years was failing me when I needed it. That's when I decided to set a trap. I needed to catch Diane in the act in a way that couldn't be denied or covered up by her police connections, and I needed to do it without breaking any laws myself. I did some research and found a specialized security product used by high-end retailers to deter theft. Ink tags that explode with permanent, non-toxic dye when tampered with. The ink was bright red, nearly impossible to remove from skin and clothing, and completely harmless physically. I modified several of these devices and carefully attached them to my wool wells, positioning them so that anyone cutting my tires would inevitably trigger the mechanism. The ink was specially formulated to activate only upon cutting or strong pressure. Normal driving wouldn't affect it. Then I waited, cameras rolling from every angle. That night, at exactly 3:11 a.m., Diane approached my car. As she knelt and began to cut the first tire, the pressure triggered the device. A spray of bright red ink exploded outward, covering her hands, arms, and face. She screamed in shock, dropping the knife and stumbling backward. In her panic, she moved to the next tire, perhaps thinking she could finish the job quickly and leave. The second device detonated as well, adding another layer of crimson to her already stained clothes and skin. Lights began coming on in neighboring houses. Diane fled, leaving behind the utility knife covered in her fingerprints and a trail of red droplets leading directly to her front door. I called the police immediately, reporting an attempted vandalism in progress. This time, when Officer Peterson arrived, he found irrefutable evidence: the knife, the ink trail, and crystal-clear footage of the entire incident from multiple angles. While Peterson was taking my statement, another call came in over his radio. A woman covered in what appeared to be blood was reported running through the neighborhood. Multiple units were responding, including Captain Reynolds. I showed Peterson my footage, making it clear that the blood was actually security ink. He radioed this information to his colleagues, but in the chaos, the message wasn't properly relayed. When police arrived at Diane's house, they found her in her bathroom frantically trying to wash the red stains from her skin and clothes. In the officer's eyes, she appeared to be washing away blood evidence. Even Reynolds couldn't ignore the scene or the multiple 911 calls from concerned neighbors who had seen a blood-covered woman running through their yards. Diane was taken into custody, initially under suspicion of far more serious crimes than tire slashing. The red ink, to untrained eyes in poor lighting, looked exactly like blood. It took hours at the station before the truth was sorted out. By then, state police investigators had arrived with my case file. Diane was formally charged with 7 counts of vandalism, criminal harassment, and destruction of property. The evidence was overwhelming. The knife with her fingerprints, the security footage, the trail leading to her home, and the red ink still staining her skin despite her desperate attempts to wash it off. Captain Reynolds tried to intervene, but with state police involved and too many witnesses, even he couldn't make this disappear. His attempt to interfere was noted by the state investigators, triggering an internal affairs review of his conduct. When Diane was released on bail the next day, she returned to find her front yard filled with neighbors, not supporting her, but demanding her resignation from the HOA. Word had spread quickly through the community about her months-long campaign of harassment against me. The neighborhood I'd worked so hard to become a part of rallied around me. People I barely knew came forward with stories of Diane's past bullying, selective enforcement of HOA rules, and petty tyrannies. It seemed I wasn't her first target, just the one who finally caught her in the act. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, Officer Peterson's patrol car pulled up. He approached with a respectful nod. "Mr. Johnson, I owe you an apology," he said, standing at the bottom of my steps. "What for, officer?" "For not taking your reports seriously enough. For letting department politics influence how we handled your case." He looked genuinely remorseful. "It's not what I signed up for when I became a cop." I gestured to the chair beside me. "Have a seat, Peterson." He sat, removing his hat and placing it on his knee. "The state police are looking into Captain Reynolds' conduct. There might be some changes coming to the department." "Change can be good," I said, offering him a glass of iced tea from the pitcher on the table between us. "Yes, sir." He accepted the drink gratefully. "I wanted to let you know that Ms. Winter's case is being taken very seriously. With the evidence you collected, the DA is confident about securing a conviction. She's also facing a civil suit from the HOA for misappropriation of funds." "Apparently." I nodded, unsurprised. Once people like Diane started to fall, all their misdeeds tended to surface at once. "And one more thing," Peterson added. "The Neighborhood Watch voted this afternoon. They want you to take over as captain. Said they could use someone with your experience and integrity." I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. "I'll consider it. Might be good to work with the police department in a different capacity." "For what it's worth, Mr. Johnson, a lot of us younger officers would welcome that. We could learn a thing or two from someone who does things the right way." As Peterson left, I sat watching the colors fade from the sky, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. My tires were intact, my neighbor was facing justice, and most importantly, I had found my place in this community. The peace I sought in retirement had been threatened, but in defending it, I'd found something even more valuable: respect, connection, and a role where my experience could still make a difference. The next morning, I woke up without that knot of dread in my stomach for the first time in months. I stepped outside with my coffee and took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. My Mustang sat in the driveway, gleaming in the early sunlight, tires perfectly intact. Across the street, a moving truck was parked in front of Diane's house. She was leaving, unable to face the community she tried to control for so long. As I watched, she emerged from her front door carrying a small box, her hands and forearms still faintly stained with red despite what must have been desperate attempts to remove the ink. Our eyes met briefly across the distance. I raised my coffee mug in a small salute. She quickly looked away and hurried to her car, the last of her dignity in tatters. Later that day, I hosted an impromptu gathering on my front lawn. Neighbors stopped by with food and drinks. Children played on my grass without fear of HOA citations, and community bonds strengthened with every conversation. As the new head of the Neighborhood Watch and a respected voice in HOA meetings, I made sure that the rules were applied fairly to everyone, that community decisions were made transparently, and that Oakwood Heights became the welcoming place it was always meant to be. 6 months later, the changes were remarkable. The HOA bylaws had been revised to remove arbitrary and exclusionary regulations. The community had become more diverse as word spread about its welcoming atmosphere. Captain Reynolds had taken early retirement amid the internal affairs investigation, and Officer Peterson had been promoted, bringing fresh leadership to the local police. Diane Winters pleaded guilty to all charges, receiving community service and probation, plus a court order to pay for all the tires she had destroyed. She moved to a different state, her reputation in shambles and her red-stained hands a temporary but powerful reminder of her actions. As for me, I finally found the peace I'd been seeking when I moved to Oakwood Heights. My garden flourished. My Mustang became a neighborhood attraction for admiring kids and adults alike, and my porch became a gathering place for friends and neighbors. Sometimes justice requires patience, evidence, and a bit of creativity. I never broke any laws, never resorted to her level of pettiness or destruction. I simply set a trap and let her own actions convict her, both in court and in the court of public opinion. My years as a detective taught me that everyone eventually reveals who they truly are. Diane revealed her true colors that night, painted in bright red security ink for everyone to see. And I revealed who I am too. Not just an ex-cop looking for a quiet retirement, but a community member willing to stand up against injustice, to build something better than what I found, and to use my experience to help others. That's the thing about justice. It isn't just about catching the bad guys. It's about creating a world where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. In my own small corner of suburbia, that's exactly what I did. Now, every morning when I look at my Mustang's pristine tires, I don't see a reminder of harassment and frustration. I see proof that standing firm against bullies, collecting evidence methodically, and finding creative solutions can transform not just your own situation, but an entire community. Sometimes, making someone regret their actions isn't about revenge at all. It's about holding up a mirror that forces them to see themselves clearly, perhaps for the first time. The red ink that stained Diane's hands eventually faded, but the truth it revealed about her character left a permanent mark that no amount of scrubbing could remove. In the end, I didn't just save my tires or my peace of mind. I helped save a neighborhood from the quiet tyranny of one person's prejudice and pettiness. And in doing so, I found my purpose in retirement, not just to rest after years of service, but to continue serving in a different way, building the community I always wanted to be part of. As a detective, I spent my career pursuing justice in the aftermath of crimes. Now I get to build something that prevents those crimes from happening in the first place. A community where neighbors look out for each other, where differences are celebrated rather than merely tolerated, and where the rules exist to protect everyone equally. The red security ink was brilliant in its simplicity, harmless but impossible to ignore, just like the truth. Sometimes that's all justice really needs. A way to make the invisible visible, to bring what's hidden in the darkness out into the light where everyone can see it clearly. My name is Marcus Johnson. I spent 15 years upholding the law as a Chicago detective. Now I uphold something just as important, the bonds of community that make laws work in the first place. And if my story teaches anything, it's that justice doesn't always need a badge and a gun. Sometimes it just needs patience, evidence, and a little bit of security ink. That night, as I watched Diane flee from my driveway, red ink dripping from her hands like the metaphorical blood of her petty crimes, I felt no satisfaction, no joy in her downfall. What I felt was relief. Relief that the truth was finally visible to everyone, not just me. In my years on the force, I learned that the most dangerous people aren't always the obvious criminals. Sometimes they're the respected community members who abuse their positions, the authority figures who exploit connections, the neighbors who smile to your face while cutting you down behind your back. Diane Winters wasn't dangerous because she slashed my tires. She was dangerous because she represented a type of insidious discrimination that hides behind rulebooks and property values, that uses words like standards and property values as shields for bigotry and exclusion. By exposing her, I didn't just solve my own problem. I lanced a wound that had been festering in Oakwood Heights long before I arrived, allowing the community to heal and grow stronger. The day after Diane moved away, an interracial couple with 2 young children moved in across the street. They told me they'd been looking at homes in Oakwood Heights for months, but had always been mysteriously outbid or told properties were suddenly off the market. It didn't take much detective work to figure out who might have been behind those coincidences. Now, they're among my closest friends in the neighborhood. Their children play in my front yard while we share stories on the porch. Sometimes, when I look at them enjoying the community that once would have subtly pushed them away, I think about how justice works in ripples extending far beyond the initial case. The state police investigation into Captain Reynolds eventually uncovered a pattern of selective enforcement and favoritism that had been going on for years. 3 more officers took early retirement, and the department underwent a complete restructuring under new leadership. Officer Peterson, now Sergeant Peterson, stops by occasionally for advice or just to chat. He's implementing community policing initiatives that are rebuilding trust between residents and law enforcement. When he talks about his vision for the department, I see the same idealism I once had, but with a wisdom about institutional problems that took me much longer to develop. The HRA, now led by a diverse board that actually represents our community, has transformed from an enforcement mechanism into a true neighborhood resource. Rather than hunting for violations, they organize community events, maintain shared spaces, and mediate the occasional dispute with fairness and transparency. My retirement turned out nothing like I expected. I thought I was leaving behind a life of solving problems and serving community, but instead, I found new ways to do both. My police training and experience didn't end up on a shelf like forgotten relics. They became tools for building something positive rather than just addressing what's broken. As for my Mustang, she still sits proudly in my driveway, a symbol of resilience. The neighborhood kids call her the Justice Mobile, a nickname I pretend to roll my eyes at, but secretly love. Twice a month, I take groups of them for rides, using the time to tell stories about responsibility, integrity, and standing up for what's right. The Security Inc. company heard about my story when it made the local news and sent me a case of their products with a note saying, "Creative crime prevention at its finest." I donated most of it to women's shelters and stalking victims, keeping just one package as a memento on my mantle. It sits there beside my police badge and my community service award. 3 chapters of the same story. Protect, detect, prevent. The tools may change, but the mission remains the same. Sometimes justice wears a uniform and carries a badge. Sometimes it carries a gavel and sits behind a bench. And sometimes it comes in a small package of Security Inc. that reveals the truth that was there all along, hiding in plain sight. My name is Marcus Johnson, and I found a way to make justice visible. Not with handcuffs or prison sentences, but with the simple, undeniable truth that actions have consequences, that communities thrive when everyone is held to the same standards, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon against darkness isn't force, it's light. The red Security Inc. that exposed Diane Winter's true nature has long since faded from her skin, but the mark she left on this community has been transformed from a scar into a reminder of how far we've come. Sometimes the greatest victories don't look like what we expect. Sometimes they look like ordinary people sitting together on a porch, watching children play without fear, in a neighborhood where everyone belongs. That's the justice I fought for, and every intact tire in my driveway reminds me it was worth the fight.